The presentation today is on the Salt Lake City County building, as you know, and I think it's interesting when we deal with historic preservation. We think when a building gets restored, it's good to go forevermore, and that's not the case. And so this is an interesting perspective on what the life cycles of buildings and how we have to deal with them. Our first presenter is Don Hartley. Don was involved in the first phase of the city and county building rehab work back in the 80s.
Thank you, Roger. What he didn't say is I was a prodigy, and when I started 12 years ago, I was like 12 years old. So we're going to do a little tag team here today. I'm going to start and reminisce about some of the restoration work that was completed back starting in the 70s into the 80s. And John Lambert will take the second half and talk about restoration work that was that's currently underway. It's kind of scary to think that a lot of this work was underway 30 years ago. Time passes quickly. So to start, I'm going to cheat a little bit and let someone much more entertaining than me, let's see, here we go, give you a little bit of an introduction. So let's try this.
The Salt Lake City and County Building is one of the most iconic historic buildings in the city, but it was almost never built in the first place and was very nearly demolished in the 1980s. During the 1880s, Salt Lake City was divided politically between the Mormon People's Party and the non-Mormon Liberal Party. Both saw the need for a larger facility to be shared by the city and county governments, but opinion about where to put it was divided. Being in control at the time, the People's Party selected the corner of First South and what was then First East, close to Temple Square and the hub of Mormon culture. Construction began in 1890, but problems arose with the site and the entire project was halted. The election came, the government changed hands. With the non-Mormon Liberal Party now in control, city leaders decided that a better site for the building would be further from the temple and in a less religiously dominated part of town. Washington Square, site of the pioneers' first camp in Salt Lake, then as a baseball field, a circus ground, a place for traveling concerts and medicine shows, was selected, and calls for new plans were made. On May 25, 1891, architects were selected with their Richardson Romanesque design for the building in the center of the park. Through an economic downturn, the building went up at a slow pace and ballooned in price, costing the city well over twice what they expected on the project. Eventually, the building was complete, and in December of 1894, 3 years and 2 months after the initial groundbreaking, it was opened to the public. At the dedication ceremony, LDS Church President Wilford Woodruff commented,
"As a citizen, I say all honor to the men who conceived the idea of erecting this structure in the heart of so beautiful a city. All honor to the taxpayers of a city who, when depression hung like a pall over them, bore their part without complaint."
The City and County Building served as the backdrop of some of the most historically significant events in the history of Utah. It was the site of Utah's Constitutional Convention and served as the state's Capitol building for 20 years until the state's Capitol was completed in 1916. After many faithful years of use and beauty, the Salt Lake City and County Building had fallen into disrepair. In an effort to save money and modernize the building over the years, all of the vaulted ceilings were covered in acoustic tile. Entire wings of rooms were walled off and forgotten, and the exterior of the building slowly degraded. Something had to be done, and opinions in the city were divided. Some wanted to restore this historic gem. Others wanted to bulldoze it. When reports came that it would be about the same price to restore as to build a new building in its place, the city embarked on the long journey of restoration, maintaining its function as the hub of city government and giving back to the city one of its most rich and unique historic treasures for many years to come.
couple of things I wanted to highlight maybe out of that was they talked about it being constructed during a depression, and the records show that they had 800 men, I'll say men, 800 men working on constructing the building, but in 100-man shifts, 100 per week. And so it was a make-work project, and you'd get your assignment, and you'd go to work for a week, and then you'd sit out for 7 more, and then you'd go back and work for a week. And so they really spread the work out. But, you know, can you imagine showing up Monday morning with a whole bunch of new blank faces staring up at you, waiting for their assignments to do? So it was very significant in that way. And you know, I'll editorialize here a little bit too and say, you know, when it wasn't, we look at the building now and think, of course, it was the obvious decision to make to restore it, right? You know, but even in process, even as we were starting to document the building and prepare construction drawings, the city still had to agree to bond for the $38 million to do the job. And it came down to a 5-4 vote. There was only one vote, you know, it was one vote that swung it in favor of restoration. So it really was kind of close at that time. Some of you saw that 1973 date. Some of you might remember, if you're old enough, remember the city and county building looking like this. In the early 70s, the city and county attempted to start a restoration process. They put scaffolding up around the entire east entrance and went through the process of trying to restore it to what they knew at that time. It was almost a stone-by-stone replacement. It was very extensive, very costly. It panicked everybody, and they stopped the job after that part was done. More of you may remember it looking more like this. The city had purchased the scaffolding, and so as a convenient means to store it and as I guess a demonstration of you know, trying to make a positive statement about restoring the building, they stacked it up around the clock tower, and there it sat for almost a decade while the project, while the government leaders deliberated about what to do. Eventually the county built their own building and moved out. The city made the decision to restore it, and the project moved forward. So what did we do? Pretty much everything. On the exterior, we repaired and replaced damaged stonework. All of the woodwork was refurbished. Throughout the life of the building, most of the windows, the original windows, had been replaced, and so we came back and created new replicas. We got the clock working. We got the put back statues that were taken down after the earthquake in the 30s when everybody thought they would fall off the building. On the grounds, restored fountains, walkways, some of the landscape that we could document from the earliest photographs and record. On the interior, same type of thing. All of the finishes were cleaned, refurbished, replaced. All of the mechanical, plumbing, and electrical was updated and brought into the 20th century. One of the interesting things that we found after doing this job, I spent a few more years on the Salt Lake City and County Building Conservancy and Use Commission, and during that period of time, when we did the electrical, we put in as many conduits as we could possibly imagine. You know, they couldn't need any more than this, and within years outgrew the digital and electrical demands with all of the technology. So had to introduce new systems for distributing power and data around the building. That part we didn't anticipate fully. Another thing that we did, and this was probably the most striking aspect of that restoration project, was to put the building on base isolators. What a base isolator is, you can see the big black box there. These base isolators are alternating sheets of steel and rubber layered on top of one another, and so when the ground moves, It's like the old magician's trick, you know, everything stays on the table, the fine china, and the tablecloth comes out from under it. The building doesn't move, but the ground does. It will stay under its own inertia, and it allows the building to move around underneath it. Same technique was just recently used at the Capitol building. This was significant because base isolation as a technology was in its infancy, and this was the first attempt at retrofitting an existing building with base isolators ever in the world. And what made it more interesting was it was an unreinforced masonry historic building. As I say, it was in its infancy. We were making a lot of stuff up. The modeling, the computer modeling technology for examining, analyzing how a building would function under the loads that they have now, we didn't have then. We were past slide rules, we were past punch cards, but you know, computer-wise, we didn't have the computing technology that they do now. So there was just a lot of good old-fashioned engineering on paper that had to go into this. We had to figure out things about how to go back and fit these isolators into the existing foundation and then cut the whole foundation free so that the building and the foundation could move independent. And then what that means is we had to figure out how to get sewer pipes, 8 and 10-inch diameter sewer pipes, to bend 12 inches in any direction so that in the event of an earthquake, you know, that wouldn't break, and electrical lines to do the same thing. So we really were on the cutting edge of technology and having to make a lot of stuff up as we went. Because the base isolators didn't fully take the loads out of the building, there was still some flexibility, some forces that would be introduced into the clock tower that needed to be mitigated. So we loaded the clock tower up with a lot of steel. And one of the aspects of the 73 era restoration was that they had manufactured basically a massive steel I-beam and had managed to bury those, each one in the corner of the clock tower that went from the base of the clock tower all the way down through the building into the building foundation. So all of the things were tied together with this massive steel down into the foundations as well. So what was our major takeaway lesson here? I think it was more like a rediscovery. We relearned that old and existing buildings of this era can and do last a very long time, but not without maintenance and not without care. You know, in America, we kind of like to think of historic restoration in terms of quadruple bypass surgery. You know, we like the drama of seeing a building, you know, like the Provo Tabernacle temple conversion, a building that's distressed and in trouble, and it's, you know, these vulnerable buildings. It's dramatically plucked from disaster and given a new life, and that's kind of how we perceive these. That's where these are the projects that get all of the attention. But what we know and what we've learned is that the best approach to historic preservation is more like diet, you know, good diet and exercise. Just care and maintenance as we go along. It's the ongoing routine and cyclical maintenance that keeps a building like this healthy and viable. Which brings us to where we are today. Back in the 80s, we knew that care would be needed in the future. We tried to anticipate and envision what that might look like. And so the future has arrived, and they've embarked on a new round of the types of maintenance I think that we imagined at that time. And I'll turn it over to John to pick up the story from here.